Give me 1 second here. So I want to share my screen. So I hope everybody's doing well. Thank you. We're going to talk about disclosures today. Okay, because they're very important, right? In a real estate transaction. So let me do this. Come over to, it should be the right form here. Okay, so I want to talk about disclosures. And so what I have in front of me, this is the purchase agreement, but we're looking at paragraph 10. And hopefully I can make it a little larger for you. Okay, and hopefully you can hear me okay. It's a little noisy on my end. I'm getting some noise, but all right, there. Okay, so paragraph 10, we're talking about disclosures today. They're very important. What are disclosures, right? They're important information about the property that a seller needs to give to the buyer. They're called disclosures. Very important. It could be anything that can be a material fact to the buyer. And a seller has to disclose all the information about the property to the buyer, okay? And this is coming right from paragraph 10 in the purchase agreement, okay? So I want us to go over this, talking about statutory and other disclosures, including the lead-based paint disclosure. Okay, so in 10A1, seller shall, within the time period specified in paragraph 14A, deliver to the buyer, if required by law, a fully completed, basically lead-based paint disclosure. Okay, that's form FLD and the pamphlet. Unless exempt, fully completed disclosures or notices required by sections 1102 and 1103 of the Civil Code. Statutory disclosures. Okay, so what are statutory disclosures? Statutory disclosures include, but are not limited to, the TDS. Okay, now any new agents, that's the real estate transfer disclosure statement is called the TDS. Okay, and the other statutory disclosure is natural hazard disclosure, known as the NHD. Okay, so very important that the seller discloses. And that last line in the paragraph, if seller has actual knowledge or industrial use and military ordinance location. And that can also be on the form SPQ or ESD. And in 10A2, any statutory disclosures required by this paragraph is considered fully completed if seller has answered all questions and completed and signed the seller's sections, and the seller's agent, if any, has completed and signed the seller's brokerage firm sections. Okay, or if applicable, an AVID, an agent visual inspection disclosure form. So very important. You notice the key thing is that they're fully completed. When you're doing or looking over your client's disclosures, which you should, you don't just hand them to them and say, fill this out and then hand them over to the buyer. You want to make sure the forms are completed properly. And so you want to look it over and make sure, if they left out any blanks, you can, ask the seller to say, seller, you left a section blank. Is there any reason why? Because they need to be complete. So then you want to have them complete those. So right on paragraph 2, they're talking about the AVID and the TDS. And very important is number 10A3, note to buyer and seller. People ask this question. They say, hey, can we waive it? My client just wants to waive the disclosure form. And what does this say? Waiver of statutory and lead disclosures is prohibited by law. So that's the answer, is no, you cannot waive them. They must be done. Okay? So please don't look for less paperwork to do and to get out of it. They need to be done. Make sure your clients are aware. And if that's something that you really didn't know, then this is how it helps, is by just constantly reading over the purchase agreement. I tell people this all the time. It's full of information. It basically has all the answers in there. And that's how you become more familiar with it as you read it more often, you'll understand the purchase agreement better. And then on number 4, within the time specified in paragraph 14A, seller, unless exempt from the obligation to provide a TDS, shall complete and provide buyer with the seller property questionnaire. And you know that form, right? That form is a lot of information. It's about, I think, 4 pages, possibly 5. And it asks a lot of questions, and all the questions are asking the seller if they are aware. So they just have to select, you know, if they are aware. And again, all of those questions should not be blank either. You should look these over. Anything blank, ask your seller about them, and make sure they get them filled in. And if you guys are on the buyer side and you're receiving these disclosures for your buyer, and if they aren't completed, then you know you need to tell the listing agent and say, hey, can we get your client to answer, you know, the questions that they've missed, because you want to make sure everything is disclosed to your client, that you're getting them fully completed documents. Okay, and then back on number 4, if seller is not required to provide a TDS, then seller shall complete and provide buyer with an exempt seller disclosure, which is known as the ESD. The exempt seller disclosure is used a lot for when it's not a residential 1 to 4, or when it's could be a probate transaction, because then the TDS might not be required. And that's when they use the ESD, the exempt seller disclosure. That's when you use that one. Okay. Number 5, buyers shall, within the time specified in paragraph 14B1.
I'm sorry, can you repeat this A4 again?
Number 4?
Yeah.
Okay. Within the time specified in 14A, seller, unless the seller is exempt from the obligation to provide a TDS, shall complete and provide buyer with the seller property questionnaire. So they're talking about the SBQ form. And I don't know if maybe your question was more on the last part of that, where I said if the seller is not required to provide a TDS, then the seller needs to do the ESD. So there are some transactions when the TDS is not required, like a probate transaction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So probate, the TDS would not be required, and so when it's not, then the ESD can be used, because there's still some things to disclose, but it's just that the TDS form itself would not be required in a probate transaction.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, you're welcome. And then, so number 5, buyer shall, within the time in paragraph 14B1, return signed copies of statutory lead and other disclosures to the seller. So it's basically telling you within a certain time frame, right? The buyer shall also return the copies back, as stated in the purchase agreement. Number 6, in the event seller or seller's brokerage firm, prior to close of escrow, becomes aware of adverse conditions materially affecting the property, or any material inaccuracy in disclosures, information, or representations previously provided to buyer, seller shall promptly provide a subsequent or amended disclosure or notice in writing covering those items. So basically they're saying, so let's say, okay, I'm just gonna say you guys are on the buyer side, and let's say the seller side, they send all the disclosures over to you guys. And then later, you know, there's something new that came up, or it could even be something the seller forgot to put in the disclosures. Okay, so they're saying that they can amend the disclosure, you know, basically they can revise the disclosure and send to the buyer a new copy. Okay, a new copy. So if something happens later, they can always amend them or redo them and provide the buyer with a new copy. And then notice it says, however, a subsequent or amended disclosure shall not be required for conditions and material inaccuracies of which buyer is otherwise aware. Okay, so if the buyer is already aware, or which are disclosed in reports provided to or obtained by buyer or ordered and paid for by the buyer. So what are they talking about here? Basically like the physical inspection, right? The buyer pays for the physical inspection, and so the buyer is going to be made aware of those items that the inspector puts in the report. So that's not something that the seller would then have to go and revise the, their disclosures, the TDS or SPQ. Excuse me. You understand that, what I'm saying? So once you get the home inspection report, the seller does not have to go back and, put all that stuff in his disclosures, okay? So that is a disclosure for the buyer as well as the actual inspection report, okay? And that's something very important. A lot of people ask about that, things that are newly discovered later. Number 7, if any disclosure or notice specified in paragraph 10A1 or subsequent or amended disclosure or notice is delivered to buyer after the offer is signed, buyer shall have the right to cancel the agreement within 3 days after delivery in person or 5 days after delivery by deposit or basically email. It says electronic record. So we're talking about email, which is mostly the way we're doing things now. It's pretty much by email. So basically, if there's a new disclosure, even after you receive the disclosures, and then now they, come up with something new, some new disclosure was given to the buyer, then the buyer would have 5 days if they receive that by email to cancel. If they don't cancel within 5 days, then, they're continuing the transaction, basically. So now let me go to, hold on one second. Here, I want to pull up the, oh, it's right here. Okay. The TDS. So if you have not represented the seller, then, maybe you might not have much experience in helping the seller complete the TDS. It's very important that the seller has to do page 1 and 2 on their own. They can have a conversation with you and ask you, what should you do? How should they complete it? But you are not to touch this. And speaking with attorneys, this form itself and the purchase agreement are the 2 most litigated forms. So it's very important. Okay, so let's just say, for example, I had one where the seller didn't even mark off that there was a, range or oven in the kitchen. And then the buyer's side is like, well, your seller didn't put that there was a range or oven there. And I did notice that they didn't put it. So then you have to go back and ask your seller to mark that off, that there is a range and an oven there. Or vice versa, make sure he's definitely not marking off something that the property doesn't have. That can be a problem. So just think if they put on here that they have a wall or window AC, and then the buyer says, hey, you said this property had a wall and window AC, so where is it? And maybe they won't say anything until the property closes escrow. And then what happens? They're going to say, nope, on the transfer disclosure form, you stated this property has a wall or window AC. And I want to see a wall or window AC at the property. So you have to look them over for your clients. You're the professional. They're not as familiar with these forms as we are, right? Because we use them repeatedly all the time. So you have to look them over. Okay, so the seller just needs to go here and check the items that are in the property. So that's on page 1. And then on page 2, the seller needs to also complete this section themselves. And it asks the seller if they are you aware of any significant defects or malfunctions in any of the following? Okay, so seller just needs to go through yes or no and mark anything off And if anything is checked off yes, then of course they would have to complete, give the explanation there. Down here as well, the seller needs to go through here. Again, the key question is, are you, seller, aware of any of the following? And they just have to go through all these questions, any substances, materials, or products. Now, if they have a question, they can ask you about it, and you can help them with that. Also, whenever there's a condo, there's a few questions here, maybe 3 or 4, that kind of pertain more if there's HOA or something, like this question here, number 12, CCNRs or deed restrictions. So if you have a condo client, that should definitely be marked yes. Even if you're representing the buyer, you want to make sure that when you receive this from the seller, they marked yes on there. So that would be number 12. Number 13 is asking if there's a homeowners association. Yes. Are there any common area facilities such as pools, tennis courts, walkways? Right? Even if there's no pool or tennis courts, there's a condominium complex, there should definitely still be some common areas, right? The walkways or courtyard area. So those are mainly the condo questions on that one. So anyhow, again, page 1 and 2, the seller has to do that themselves. And anything that's marked yes, you give the explanation here. Is where you need to, where they need to explain, why it's marked yes. Okay. On D1 and D2, this is just where the seller certifies that the property will be in compliance with the health and safety code by having the operable smoke detectors. And then same thing on number 2, the seller is in compliance with the health and safety code by having the water heater strapped and braced. Okay. Now on page 3, this is where you come in. Okay, seller signs up here at the top, and then we have agent's inspection disclosure. And you notice here, this one says agent or broker representing the seller. So then this will be the listing agent section to do in that section. And then on this one, agent's inspection disclosure, this is where the buyer's agent would complete this. I recommend you do not leave this blank. You should always put something in here. And don't forget, you could check the box here for see avid, but I think you still should always put something in here. And a good thing to put, sometimes they put, just like I did at the top section where it says buyer to have physical inspection to satisfy themselves, or buyer is advised to check with the city regarding permits, or buyer to do their own due diligence regarding square footage. Although CAR came out with this square footage form, so that helps for that. And then see avid, but I just think you should always write something in here, and not, it should never say agent notes. I'm sorry, it should never say agent notes, no items for disclosure. This should never be checked. There should always be something here. This is your time for you to make a disclosure there on that. Okay, so let me go back to, if I can get back to my, let's see, I'm going to get back to the other, let's see. Okay, back to this one. Okay, back to the purchase agreement. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, so then it also talks about the NHD disclosure and booklet. Very important. That pretty much is has to be used for almost every single property. It is a statutory disclosure, so you want to make sure that gets ordered and gets out to the buyer. There's a third-party report, and very important for the buyer to have. So does anyone have a question regarding disclosures? No questions on disclosures? So just remember, if someone asks you if they can be waived, the answer is no, you cannot waive the statutory disclosures. And after, even after, let's say a buyer removed their contingencies, but then a new disclosure, a new report, something happens, they now notice something new at the property, or either seller made a new disclosure. It doesn't matter that they sign off on the contingencies, okay? The buyer would still have 5 days to review this new information. So I've seen where, let's say, buyer removed contingencies, and then it was a condo complex transaction, and then some new CC&Rs came in, the rules and regulations. Okay, this is still a new report that's given to the buyer, so the buyer would have 5 days. So, and you want to make sure, if you are on the seller side, you want to make sure, let's see where they are. Oh, sorry, it was after. You want, oh yeah, 14, sorry about that. Paragraph 14 has your time period. So if you're representing the seller, you want to make sure that you have everything done within your 7 days, right? So within 7 days, that is when the listing agent or seller should deliver to buyer all the reports, disclosures, and information, which is right here. So let's say you're representing the buyer. You guys still need to watch the time frames. If it's 7 days and you haven't received the disclosures from the listing agent, you need to reach out. You need to say, hey, it's already 7 days. Buyer has not received any disclosures. Are you going to be sending them over? It's already past the time frame. So you really have to watch both sides almost. You shouldn't have to, but you're not going to just sit and wait and wait and wait and not ask the listing agent, right? So know your time frames. And how are you going to know that? By looking over the contract. And the more you read it, the more you'll know it even better. And then the buyer has 17 days, unless you guys countered that out, for their time frame to return any reports and disclosures. Okay. And so just remember, inspections also follow under this section. Buyer investigations. Okay. You have 17 days, unless it was countered to 10 days or 12 days, what have you. So just want to make sure you know your time frame. Any questions, guys?
Yeah, Kim?
Yes.
Back on the TDS statement, section 1, there's the 3 check boxes.
Okay.
Can you go over that a little bit?
Sure.
What's appropriate for each type or each box? What information is appropriate?
Okay, let's see on the TDS. All right, let me go back to that. Okay, let's see, page 1, right? Okay, where are you talking? Right here at the top?
I'm sorry, I can't see. I'm looking at my eye. Yes, at the top, there's the 3 check boxes there.
Right, substitute a disclosure. So the following disclosures and other disclosures required by law, including natural hazard. Okay, let's see. Inspection reports completed pursuant to the contract of sale or receipt for deposit. Additional inspection reports. Yeah, they've added this because this used to didn't be there. It was only 1 box before. So what they're saying, if you have other inspection reports then you can check this box off. You know, maybe you had some other, who knows, maybe a septic tank inspection, any other type of report. If you did, you can check this box, and then you can put the name of the report there. Inspection reports completed pursuant to the contract of sale. That could be also the home inspection. Or you would check the last box that says no substituted disclosures for this transfer. So only if you have other reports that you kind of want to incorporate here and say, here's an additional inspection report. It could be a mold inspection, any other type of inspection. Like on the buyer inspection advisory, the CAR form, BIA, there's a whole list of inspections, you know, different type of inspections the buyer can have. And if you had one of those reports, then you could, you know, check the box here and say additional inspection report. And they would say mold inspection or roof inspection. That's all. So this is just where you want to say that you have additional reports or not.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So how many total disclosures are, Kim?
There are a lot. As far as the number of disclosures, there's several. And it all depends on the transaction too, the type of transaction. Like I was saying, on a probate, you know, you might not use as many disclosures, but there's so many. If you look in the form, I don't know if you'll be able to see it from here. Let's see. I thought maybe it would only show those. But anyhow, can you see the form library here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Yeah, well, there's tons. You have, well, you got your Avid, it's just for you to make your own disclosure, but you're talking about, let's see. Yeah, it's just so many. Almost all of them are disclosures besides the purchase agreement. You know, so you got your lead disclosure, the transfer disclosure, the TDS, SPQ, the water heater statement. There's just tons of disclosure. So I can't really give you a number. I would say most of them are disclosures unless there's just an advisory. Let's see.
So what are the most common disclosures for the standard?
Yeah, so the most standard ones, yes, would be the TDS, SPQ, the water heater smoke detector, the lead paint, the NHD. Those would be like the main ones.
Okay.
All the time. Yeah.
Thank you, Kim.
You're welcome. So basically just saying, you know, it's very important you guys read over the contracts and the agreements so you know them better. Make sure your seller or buyer are getting complete reports. If they have blanks, send them back and say, you know, please have your seller answer all the questions. Okay, because you want to make sure you're doing your best job for your buyer and that they're getting complete reports. And you won't know that if you don't look it over yourself. So look them over and make sure they're complete. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
With this disclosure, can we do this like before the appraisal comes in, or we can do this after?
They should be done very early on. If you're representing the seller, you got your listing agreement signed. I mean, you can do it at the same time that you got the listing agreement signed or released. Remember, look at the time frame. I told you the seller has 7 days, only 7 days from acceptance. So you can't wait on any appraisal to be done. It needs to be done very early on, right at the beginning of the transaction, or even when you take the listing, if you have time for the seller to go through this, but you want to get it done right away. You only have 7 days to get it to the buyer. Okay. Should be done early. as well as your avid. Make sure you do the avid with the TDS. Well, if you're on the buyer side, then you're only going to do your avid, right? Because you don't complete the TDS, the seller side does.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome. I think that's pretty much it, unless you guys have more questions. Just pay close attention to paragraph 10, and just know that you cannot waive the disclosures. Okay?
I have a question.
Yes.
On the buyer side, does the buyer has to pay for the appraisal?
Yes, because the buyer's lender will order for the appraisal, for the appraiser to come to appraise the property. So yes, the buyer pays for that.
Okay, got it.
Mhm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other question, guys? If not, then that's it. Until the next time.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Kim.
Much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.